All right, guys, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. As Melissa, if you didn't hear in the beginning, she did state we're going to record the meeting just so that we can run it back and post it on our Facebook group so that people who didn't get to join can go ahead and watch back. And if there's any time for Q&A at the end, if there's personal questions or things like that, we will make sure to shrink the video down so that we're not exposing everybody's personal information and questions. But hey, thank you so much for joining us. We love nights like this. We are part of the KARES Foundation. My name's Taylor, and I have a son, Jackson, who is 8, and he has KDM5C. And I'm so lucky that we have Sarah joining us today to talk all things IEP. She has been a huge gift in my life because that Jackson is my first, and the IEP world was very new to me. We went through all of kindergarten feeling like we had our life together, and then first grade hit, and we ran into some bumps in the road. We were told that Jackson, my son, who was in kindergarten he was going to school for 3 full days, and then he was going to an ABA outpatient therapy for the other 2 days, full days of school. So he was missing 2 full days of school a week. And at the end of kindergarten, our special ed director at the time had told us that truancy was going to be threatened, and that there would be a police officer at my door if he didn't go to school for 5 days a week. And that was really scary hearing that for the first time. And so Sarah came to the rescue, and she helped me really understand my rights in this whole realm of things. And then she helped me prepare and navigate a meeting with our superintendent. Um, and it was incredibly helpful. And so we made sure that his letter of of necessity for outpatient ABA was enough for us to continue his services that were deemed as medically necessary. And so just the way that she helped me navigate that was an incredible gift to myself and my family, and Jackson, who is still today only going to school for 3 full days a week and going to ABA for 2 full days a week. And it just, for our family, it works. And those therapies have been a huge gift for us. So I'm glad that he's in 3rd grade now and we're still on the same track. And I'm grateful for the way that Sarah helped us with that. And she's also helped me prepare for a lot of IEP meetings that happened after that one incident as well. So Sarah has a PhD in school psychology from Michigan State University, and she has worked and trained in hospital, clinical, and school settings. She has worked as a school psychologist for 8 years, supporting a variety of special ed programs, including early childhood, cognitively impaired classrooms, and severe multiple impairment classrooms. During her time there, she did a lot of assessments, consulting with teachers and parents. And currently, she is an assistant professor at the University of Detroit Mercy, training future school psychologists. So, what a gift all of those future psychologists have with Sarah teaching them. But most importantly, Sarah is a mom who has a child with an IEP, so she understands and feels from a parent's point of view. So most of us who are here are sitting in that seat, and so she can empathize and understand where we're coming from as well. So without further ado, please give a warm welcome to my friend, Dr. Sarah Rowe.
Thank you. Yeah, that was such a nice introduction. I was so honored to be able to just partner with you, Taylor. I think that something that I love professionally and personally is helping people. That's probably common for people that go into the field of psychology, but and the people that go into the field of education. But man, IEP land can be complicated, and there's a lot that even as I sit through those meetings as a parent that I think I'm just gonna let this go because I don't really understand what they're saying, but I don't need to know. But then there's things that we do need to know. So hopefully today I'll answer some questions. I will go ahead and I did prepare a PowerPoint to kind of guide us through. So I will go ahead and share that. And that will help us give us a structure. Let's just make sure. All right. Okay. So IEPs made simple. Oh, it's not sharing my presenter view, so give me 1 second. Let me share it a different way. Hmm. Oh, it really wants to share it this way. Well, that's okay. I'm gonna just zoom in if we're good with that. Okay. IEPs made simple. So you already know about me. I have a degree in school psychology, worked for many years as a school psychologist, and then eventually transitioned into being a faculty member where I am, as Taylor mentioned, training school psychologists. So I'm still deeply in this world of IEPs and how to support students just on the other end of it. Personally, I went into school psychology because I feel really strongly about social justice, particularly for people with disabilities. Um, I think that we can do better. I think we know better now, and I think that that education has made long strides, but I think there's ways that we can still improve how we help people with disabilities, including their families. And so that drew me to school psychology and my current job as a professor training students who can do the same thing, hopefully, in advocating for families and students. Um, I also do have two wonderful kiddos. This is me and my kiddos. This is a little bit old, but I don't take family photos apparently. I was looking for a family photo and I'm like, this is the best we got. It's 2 years old, but both in elementary school and my son does have an IEP. And so I have learned what it feels like to be on the other side of the table, having, you know, eight hopefully friendly faces staring at you, right? But it can be also intimidating, just not knowing what to expect. What are they going to share? What do I need to have prepared to share? And I can only imagine what it feels like if you don't have the professional background to understand all the terms that are being thrown around, all of the many, many paperwork pieces that are being shared at those meetings. So hopefully today we can elucidate some of the mysteries of IEP land. I want to say if there are questions today, feel free to go ahead and use the chat. I see four, but I think people are still introducing themselves. Yeah, okay. Um, I will keep an eye out to see if I see some chats and some questions, and I'm happy to answer them as we go along. And I have a few spots where I'll kind of pause and see if there are questions. But otherwise, like they mentioned, we'll also have time at the end for Q&A. So if there's something personal and you want to wait till the end when maybe we turn the recording off, that's fine too. Um, so either that, I don't have an easy way to see everyone's faces, so raising hands might be hard unless Taylor or Melissa wants to watch out for someone if they're raising their hand to ask a question. So that will be the plan for that. So my goal as I was preparing, um, obviously I don't know each and every one of you who is attending today or who will watch this later on, but hopefully what I am going to share with you will help you to understand what some of the kind of common terms are in special education, what the basic processes look like in special education, and then also just to learn and talk about just ways that we can collaborate with schools, particularly since I've worked both on the inside and the outside. I've seen a variety of ways that have gone really well and that have been helpful, as both seen it modeled from other parents and how they partner with us when I was a school psychologist, and also ways that I've tried to partner to advocate for my own son. And I do want you all to walk away knowing a little bit more about your rights as a parent and/or where you can find more about your rights and how to advocate for your child. So, as I was preparing, I was just thinking a lot about how overwhelming this process can be. So, before we get into all the nitty-gritty and the details, if you have had a child on an IEP or you're wondering if your child is going to need an IEP, or maybe they don't have one and you're still in that process or you're thinking about it, I just want you to know you are not the only parent that feels overwhelmed by this process. It is an overwhelming process, and that's normal, but it doesn't have to be something that you do alone. And so hopefully today I'll give you some ideas of ways that you can kind of get your questions answered and go into some of those meetings with the school feeling a little bit more prepared um, than you otherwise might be. And just know that as a parent, your input is vital. As a school psychologist, I always told the parents, like, you know your kid the best. So if something that we are putting in this plan doesn't make sense or you don't feel like is fully addressing their needs, like, please speak up. And if you don't have someone at the table, at an IEP table, telling you that, um, know that that's true, even if they haven't verbalized it to you. And so be ready to be able to share what you know about your child because you see your child in other settings that are equally important to their educational experiences. And so you can help the team come up with kind of a plan that's going to best meet their needs. All right. So, what laws are out there is not the most exciting place to start, but the reason that we have this whole IEP process is because there has been amazing legislation that has come through that has acted as a protection and is there to serve as a protection for people with disabilities. So the Individuals with Disabilities Act, or IDEA, sometimes it's called, is basically the law that came out decades ago that said that public education has to provide a free and appropriate public education for kids with disabilities. So previous to that, there was really not as many guarantees, right, about how our children that had special needs were going to be provided educational experiences. So it really was a good thing, is a good thing. And then the implementation of it is often what we think of with the IEPs or special education. And it essentially what it does is requires that not only do they have to be allowed to come to school, but they have to be able to be provided with specialized instruction. So if a child has a disability that requires a certain type of instruction or service, that they have to be able to get that in the school setting so that they can have that great educational experience that neurotypical kids are having. So at a broad level, here's my visual of what this special education process looks like. Because I didn't have this screen is funny, so let's see if I can zoom in even more. Um, Not too much. Okay. Um, so essentially first, um, when there's a concern, that's the beginning of this special ed process, right? And that concern might come from you as the parent. It might come from the school. Um, for some of you, if your child was very young and started out, maybe you identified, um, you know, that they had unique needs early on. That could happen through a referral in early childhood, or it could happen once they get to elementary school, right? There's obviously a wide spectrum of kids' needs on IEPs. The law that I mentioned before does apply for birth to 21 in special places like Michigan, where Taylor and I are. We get IEPs till they're 26 if they need it. um, but even for those of you, I noticed in the chat, some of you have younger kiddos, right, who are in early childhood settings. Um, there is something different for birth to 3-year-olds, but there are services that are supposed to be provided for children that have identified disabilities even as early as the infant toddler stage. But essentially, the special education process, when there's a concern identified by someone, it could be the teacher, it could be you as the parent, it could be your pediatrician saying to you, hey, these are kind of the developmental milestones we would expect, and maybe we're not seeing those yet, so maybe we should reach out to see if the school has some services that they can provide. And then the school once is either if they are the ones initiating it or you are, they have to do an evaluation and then they have to make a decision on whether or not the child is eligible for the services. Talk a little bit about that in a second. And then they'll have what we call an IEP meeting or this individualized education program meeting. And then with that plan in place, the services are then provided at the school during the school experience for the child. And then from then on, there's annual IEPs once a year with every 3 years, something called a reevaluation. So this is kind of the broad level process that is special education. And it's kind of just a timeline of how the services and the help gets to children that need it, right? Um, but it's unique for each kid, right? And what they put into this individualized education program plan is going to be different for your kid or my kid or Taylor's kid. Each kid is going to have a unique, and that's kind of that in that language is an individualized program plan. So first, I'm going to start by just talking about the evaluation process. So in order to get into special education, there has to be some kind of an evaluation. So sometimes there's a misnomer, or sometimes when parents talk to pediatricians, their pediatrician will like kind of write them a note and they bring it to the school and hope that that's enough. But unfortunately or fortunately, schools have to do like a full comprehensive evaluation of their own. If you are someone who's gone and had an outside evaluation of your child, I more than encourage you to bring that to the school because they will use that and look at that information and it can be very useful for them. They still will need to do their own evaluation because medical guidelines for disabilities and like developmental delays are different in the schools than they are in clinical medical settings. A lot of overlap on things like autism or learning disabilities and intellectual disabilities, but there are some unique characteristics that they have to meet in order to get school services. So either the evaluation process starts if you request an evaluation, and you can do that. I think the most successful way to do that is in writing. So sometimes you might talk to someone at the school and ask for an evaluation, but the most successful strategy is if it's actually written down, so in an email. And in the email, you would say something like, I have a concern that my child, may have a disability. Here's the things that are making me worried about their development. I'm wondering if we can, if we need to do an evaluation or if they need to maybe be considered for special education. And then the school has to respond to you and they have to request your consent to do an evaluation. So if they agree and they say, yes, we think that we need to do an evaluation, they'll come to you and ask you to sign a piece of paper. It may be kind of lengthy, but they'll go over your child's kind of educational history and they'll ask for that consent. And then they have to finish that evaluation in a certain amount of time. So the federal guideline is 60 days, but some places have slightly different timelines. So like in Michigan, we have only 30 days, which is I think it's a pretty quick turnaround, but to a parent, it can feel like a long time. So um, just know that there is a process to get the IEP. So it's not, unfortunately, we can't like identify the need and then the next day be able to start an IEP process. There is kind of a process to follow through and make sure that it's both to make sure that the resources are going to the students that need them. And it's also to make sure that the team has enough time to gather information about your child because they want to make the plan that's going to be the most useful for them and the most individualized and helpful for them. And that takes a lot of time to gather that information. So that is the kind of the initial evaluation process. But if you're someone who already has a child in special education, at least every 3 years, the federal government requires that the team consider doing a reevaluation. So that would be a second evaluation or a third evaluation, depending on how long they've been in special education. And it could be done for a variety of reasons. So it might happen if a change is needed on the IEP and they need more information to make that change. So if, maybe they were not receiving social work services, but maybe they're having some more emotional meltdowns at school and they're noticing that. And sometimes they can add that without doing an evaluation, but maybe they want to take a more careful look at what's going on in the classroom for the child. They may request to do an evaluation at that 3-year mark. It could also happen when a teacher or a parent requests it. So if your child has been on an IEP for, let's say, 2 years, so they're not quite up for that 3-year reevaluation mark, but maybe something's not going well. Maybe the year has really been a challenge and you're just thinking something's not fitting. And maybe you've tried a couple of times, like talking to the school and it doesn't seem like it's like mystery of what's going on, right? And nobody can quite figure it out. I think that's a time when the evaluation process can be actually really helpful to get more information on, an update on your child's development or just have more eyes on your kid in the school setting. So like we all think very carefully before we have each annual IEP, but the most people get together when there's a reevaluation and start to look at your child and try to get together and they will do things like they will observe in the classroom, right? They might do individual testing with your child depending on what the needs are, so that they maybe understand where their language is or where their academic development is. And they can do rating skills where they get input from you about what's happening at home or input from the teacher about what's happening in the classroom. And hopefully, ideally, that information is used to then inform the IEP. Sometimes they have enough information at that 3-year evaluation mark that they don't need to do another evaluation. And they would say, you know what, we're on a really good track with this student. We really have a good idea from our classroom assessments and our information from the parents and things in the classroom that we don't feel we need a reevaluation. So usually if you have a child on an IEP, on the paperwork somewhere, it will tell you what that date is and what those due dates are. So like if you have an IEP, it will say when your annual IEP due date is, and it should have somewhere on there when that 3-year mark is. Sometimes I think we as school employees don't do a great job of educating parents. We just ask them, we just like basically inform them that we're not reevaluating, or um, if we are, we have to get a signature so it's a little bit more formalized. But just know that you can also ask for that evaluation at any time. Um, and then the schools have to consider it. They don't have to say yes to doing an evaluation if they really feel that it's not necessary. But ideally, it can open a conversation. And I think depending on who your point of contact is, it might be a school psychologist, it might be a speech and language pathologist, it might be the classroom teacher, if they have a special education classroom teacher. They're the ones that can really kind of give you an update on whether or not they think that that evaluation is going to be necessary or helpful. Okay, I want to take a second and pause and just see if there are any questions just about the overview on evaluations and eligibility. I'm looking to see there's any more. So I saw one question that says, is the US standard for an IEP up to age 21? I know, yes, that is very odd, isn't that not? So the federal law is kind of like a bare minimum that the states have to comply with. And then the states can offer above and beyond. So like in the case of Michigan, we are unheard of. We're like the only state that goes to 26. I think it's great because I'm biased. I love working for the schools, and I think schools do a really great job of supporting kids, particularly those that are going to need more intensive post-secondary supports. But some states it goes through 21, and then usually what will happen is it transitions the types of services for those with more significant disabilities transitions to community mental health. Um, but yeah, it is an odd thing that it's a varying ages in different states, but your school should be able to tell you kind of when it cuts off for that state in particular. It looks like WA is Washington, I think. Yes, it got extended to the end of school year. They turned 22. Okay. So that is something to pay attention to if you have an older child, is when do these services end? When does this IEP process end? And then what does that next phase look like? Something on the IEP is something called transition services, and that usually requires that it's at minimum that the kid starts coming, if it's appropriate, can come to the IEPs at age 16 and take a more active involvement in the planning of what post-education, what post-K-12 education will look like. And might look like job training, post-secondary education for some kids, could look like a variety of things. Okay, I think that was the only question. Yeah, is that the only one that I see? Okay. Um, all right. So key acronyms. We're going to transition into talking about the IEPs. So I like to do when I teach my grad students a little acronym test. I'm not going to do that to all of you. I'm sure some of you who have more seasoned parents in here probably have seen a lot of these acronyms before and maybe are familiar with them. But man, isn't it funny how every field, regardless of what the profession is, comes up with a gazillion acronyms. And it makes me frustrated as a parent and as a school psychologist because when I attend my IEPs, I'm having to whisper to my husband and say, that's, FAPE means free and appropriate public education. And he still doesn't quite know what that means anyways. But um, here's a couple of the common words or phrases that you might want to be familiar with that might assist you. Obviously, at the bottom, we talked about the individualized education program. So that's just the name for like the legal paperwork. If you have a child with a disability that will guarantee them access and certain types of services. The review of existing evaluation data is called the READ. And that process, it is a process where we look at students to see if they need an evaluation. And it is the paperwork that you would sign if you end up needing an evaluation, and it basically outlines what the um, team has identified our needs for the student, and then it would have an evaluation plan where it kind of gives you a sense of um, what they plan to do with your child. Then the procedural safeguards are that is a document. Now, it is state specific, but every state should have a document like this where it documents all your rights as a parent of a child who is in the special education process, whether they have an IEP yet or maybe they're in the process. It basically goes through things like saying, what can I do if I disagree with the school, right? What can I do if I don't agree with the school, the classroom placement that they decided on, or what if I don't agree with the eligibility area that they decided on, or even the eligibility at all. Maybe the school said they aren't eligible and I don't agree with that, or all these different things. It goes through and it gives you different options. It talks about things like mediation and things like this, and we'll talk a little bit more about kind of your rights and what to do if you ever do have a disagreement. But it is uncomfortably long. That document in Michigan, I kid you not, is probably 40 or 50 pages. So I always would tell parents when I am handing them this paper, I would say, if you ever have questions or concerns, please come to me first. Please come to one of us at the school and ask us to explain something to you or just share your concern. Um, I, I I like to assume, that everyone is there to support your child, right? Even though sometimes we do have disagreements um, with the schools, I think they're there for the same reason we are, and that's that they want to help your child learn and be successful. So, um, the next acronym is Free and Appropriate Public Education. So I've already thrown this one out there a few times, so sorry about that. But this is essentially that your child has a right to a education that meets their unique needs, and it should be at no cost to you, right? So that regardless of if your child has a disability or doesn't have a disability, that they should be able to go to school and access school and learn and develop just like every other child their age. And that came out of that law, the IDA. And then we have this fun concept of least restrictive environment. Is such a weird word, right? But if you hear at an IEP, they talk about least restrictive environment. This is basically the idea that children with disabilities should be educated alongside their same age peers that are without disabilities as much as is possible, right? Um, so that looks different for every child. That might mean, what like a a separate classroom. It might mean some time in separate classroom. It might mean they're in a regular gen ed classroom with some time out. It can look like a lot of different things, but it's this idea that um, schools shouldn't be just placing kids in self-contained classrooms without fully thinking about what the child's needs are, right? And that even those placed in certain classrooms should be given access to being alongside peers without IEPs as much as is reasonably possible. We know there's a ton of benefits about inclusion, both for our children that have IEPs and also for those children who do not have IEPs, that there are a lot of social, emotional, and developmental benefits for their students as well. Um, so that's an important word to just know if it gets thrown out, is to be aware of, is that least restrictive environment term. Okay, so important IEP content. So the actual terminology that is used may differ in each state. So these are the kind of requirements that are in the federal law, but then the name of it might differ on your IEP paperwork. But essentially every IEP has to start with thinking about what is this child's current educational and functional performance. Sometimes it's called like present level. There's a variety of different words they could use for it. But basically it's a section of the IEP where the team is supposed to outline where your child is functioning right now. And it covers a variety of different areas. So depending on the child's needs, it can cover everything from their academic development to their language development to their physical development, like their fine and their gross motor skills, their social emotional development. There's a section for medical, right? So you could indicate all the medical needs that your child has on that IEP. And then what they're supposed to do is they're supposed to take all those needs and the development that your child is at and use that to say, okay, based on these needs, here are the type of services we're going to plan for your child. And so that is where the individualization comes. So if you are getting ready to go to your IEP, um, ideally they would have checked in for your input, but sometimes I have found as a parent it might be a very brief, someone emails me and I just email a few sentences back and then that gets copied and pasted into the IEP. Um, so I would think carefully about when the IEP is coming up, what are your like main points that you want to see, and what are the main areas of concern that you have for your child, and where do you want to see them grow for the next year? And make sure you're clear about that because they should and they will incorporate that if they can. But yeah, I laugh because it's sometimes I have felt that the parent input is inauthentic beforehand, but when I'm there, if I'm prepared, it can become a little bit more impactful. But that's one section to pay attention to make sure that like if you feel like your child has social emotional needs, like make sure that they're filling out a section about their social emotional needs, right? If you are concerned about their fine motor skills and their handwriting or their scissors skills or these kinds of things, like that's an area that you want to see them filling out and paying attention to on that present level of their IEP. Um, and then that present level is supposed to inform a lot of different areas, but mainly it informs what kind of goals is the child going to have. And then on the next page, we'll talk about services. So their goals essentially are kind of a answer to a question of where do we expect this child to be in 1 year? So based on where they're at now, where do we hope them to be next year? And they're supposed to come up with like sub goals so that you have like check-ins across the year, every couple months. Sometimes it's 3 times a year. Sometimes it's four. It depends on how your school district sets up their IEP input and their essentially their grading sequence. Um, on the side, I have just a sample of like an IEP in Michigan. This is not a real child. This is a fake sample from a school district of an IEP where they have like an annual goal. That goal also should say who's in charge of it. So that way, if you have questions about a goal, like let's say your child is supposed to be working on um, requesting, so using like their AAC to request some preferred activity, or maybe they're supposed to be verbally requesting it, and that's part of their goal. If you're noticing progress on that, you could always you look to see who's supposed to be responsible for that. It's probably in this example, probably easy. This is probably the speech pathologist, but you could email them that. Or if you're noticing like regression and not no progress in the area of the goal, you can also touch base with that person about that and say, and you can ask for input in between those cycles of where they're supposed to be giving you input. Um, because they're supposed to be collecting data across time, not just um, once every couple of months. Um, and then we have a section about supplementary aids and services. That is a fancy word for a lot of different things, but a lot of accommodations. So things you'll see under this section would be things like if your child needs extended time to take tests, if your child needs reminders for certain classroom expectations, right? So um, if you have a child who sometimes I'm not speaking from experience, wink, wink, blurts out at inappropriate times, that they maybe need visual reminders, right, for classroom routines or something. And so they have those kinds of things documented. So this is kind of acute to things that the teacher does in the classroom, right? Things the teacher does in the classroom that can set up an environment of success for your child. So whether it's environmental setup, whether it's things that the teacher is supposed to do in order to ensure that the student has extra success. All of those kinds of things can fit under here in supplementary aids and services. And then there's a fun section, but I don't really, is modifications and accommodations to testing. So unfortunately, in this day and age, everybody has to take testing at a certain grade level. And so there is often a section that will talk about what tests they take. Some students may take the same tests that other gen ed peers take, but with accommodations. Some may take alternative assessments, depending on the level of their needs and their disability. And then another really, really important section, I put the example on the side, is essentially the programs and services. So what is the school offering? Not only what are the goals, but how are we going to get there, right? So we know we're going to work on, for example, let's say a student is working on their communication, they have a communication goal, maybe they have a social emotional goal, right? And maybe they have an academic goal, if those are some areas of need for that child. Well, then you're probably going to see in programs and services some services that would support and match that. So, like in this example, right, you could have a student with speech and language therapy, and on this paperwork, there's supposed to be a documentation of how often is your child going to be seen, right? Um, and usually they're pretty quick in IEPs to just tell you what your child gets, but you can ask and say, if you are questioning if it's appropriate or if you think it's not enough, you can ask them and say, is that, based on the level of needs, is that really appropriate, or do we need to bump it up a little bit more? You'll often see them putting ranges in, um, which is because sometimes there's breaks and that kind of thing, but you can pay attention to trying to get them to make those ranges smaller so that they aren't, like, let's say, just saying 2 to 4 days a month, right? Or something like that that's very wide, or 2 to 4, well, 2 to 4 times a week would be crazy, but 2 to 4 times a month means they might only get seen, every other week sometimes, right? So this is a page where I think it's okay to slow the IEP team down. So if you're in an IEP meeting, it's okay to say, can you tell me like what my kid's schedule would look like on a week-to-week basis? I think that's one thing that is a practical question you could ask them, because when they put it on the paperwork, it's a little bit confusing. To me as a parent, when I sat through those, I'm sometimes like, okay, you're telling me number of times per week, or like normally it's like by month in my child's school district. And so sometimes I say, like, just tell me what their day will look like, right? Like, how often are they going to you? How often are they going to you? And also, I also like to know, what are they missing when they are going to these services? If you have a child that's in a gen ed classroom and is going out for services, what's going on in the classroom, so that you make sure that they are picking times that, are going to be the least disruptive to missed instruction for your child. And they're always usually thinking about that, but it's also helpful for you as a parent to just know, so that you know that the child um, is going to be provided services at the time that's the most conducive for them not missing other important things. Here I mentioned also, this is another area that is important, is thinking about the transition planning. And that is a section that, if your child is younger, is just skipped over until they get to be 16, or in Michigan, it's a little bit earlier. Once they get to be about middle school or high school aged, then there's a whole section on transition planning that comes into play, that there should be assessments done, and there should be thinking about really what the future looks like for this child. What are their interests? What are their skill sets? And then that can also inform what the IEP focuses on as well, right? To think about post-secondary supports and opportunities, and things like job training, and that sort of thing. Okay, so I'm going to pause here. Any questions about IEP content?
I have one, Sarah, just for the sake of the conversation, I'll make this up as an example, but
Mhm.
let's say a writing goal for my kindergartners, it started in kindergarten. They had a writing goal. He wasn't even able to like draw shapes or anything like that. So shapes were the first part of his writing
Yeah.
goal. And now we're like a couple years into it. It's the same goal. We are not noticing progress. Maybe the school team is saying, but we are seeing really minimal progress, but like for the parent, it's not up to my level
Not
of like
meaningful.
I don't think we're making enough progress here. If there's like a disagreement between parent and team, how do we reconcile that? Like, how do we say, like, can I as a parent just like call the audible and say, I actually want to scrap all writing and I just want to go to typing. Like he can type now for the rest of his gen ed because I don't want us to like focus on this goal anymore. How do
Right.
you how do you reconcile? Like how do you arrive to a place of agreement or change?
I think voicing that is a good idea. Now, they, depending on their team, may or may not like the idea of scrapping it, but then you would need to ask them why. Like, what's the purpose of this if we've been working on it for this amount of time? Ideally, if they're not seeing progress, I don't know if any of you out there are getting older like me, but I've been in like physical therapy for different things. I get dismissed if I don't make progress because they say, why are we working on this and spending time and money if it's not progressing? And so I think that is a very valid request, is to say, I don't want this as a goal because I don't want the precious time that you're spending with him being spent on this.
Yeah.
And you can ask and say, I would prefer to see, you know, a goal for learning typing. Now, the tricky thing is, it's probably the occupational therapist that, right, works on those handwriting skills, and they may not work on typing. I don't know, they may. Um, but I think exactly that is like you um, ask that question, and at the end of the IEP, if an agreement hasn't been come to, um, you can put that in writing that you don't agree and that you want to hold another IP, or you could even, if it needs to happen, if it's like a really big deal in the middle of the meeting and you still haven't come to an agreement on some part of the meeting, you can adjourn IEPs.
And what
So you
is
don't have to finish an IEP. Adjourn, sorry, is a fancy word of just saying you can say, we're going to take a break. We're not going to finish this meeting right now because
Mhm.
we need time. The team needs to think about this input that the parent has, and we're going to come back even in a few days, and come back and talk about this again and think about it, right? Now, ideally, that means the school district has worked far enough ahead that their IEP is not due the next day, because in that case, they're not going to want to take a break and come back to it. But I have had meetings, especially around placement, where we can't come to an agreement. And so we agree to take a break and we say, we're going to come back. But in that case, like that's a smaller one that I would think ahead of the IEP team meeting, I would be alerting them to that. When they ask for my input, I would say, I really feel strongly that this particular goal of writing he is not making progress, and I would prefer us to look at this as a skill set that could be more beneficial or something like that.
Yeah. No, that's good.
Yeah.
Like Lauren has a question too. She said, what can you do if your school district puts less therapy hours in the IEP than your therapist slash doctors think is necessary, but the school district doesn't want to give additional hours?
Oh, that is a hard one. I mean, the first thing is always just to ask, is to say, can you do more? Right? To ask the school, can you do more? And typically the school does have a certain guideline of like numbers that they give towards students at a certain developmental level, right? So students with significant needs get more hours of, say, speech and language or potentially social work or whatever, depending on their needs. And so there is a certain level where we're not going to get perfection sometimes, and the schools are not legally mandated to give you whatever the doctor says. So it's just the name of the game because it is public education and there is funding limits and staffing limits. And so I would say the first thing to do would be just to ask. And if they can't do it, you can then go back to your procedural safeguards if you really disagree and feel like they need more hours than that. And you can kind of go through. Usually, the first step is some kind of formal mediation, right? Where you're bringing in a third party and they are trying to help you and the school mediate this disagreement through the IEP process. Yeah, Melissa said you can come with the data and ask for an independent evaluation. You can. Something like hours on an IEP is not necessarily evaluation related. That would be more if you disagree with the eligibility decision. But certainly, if you have outside data from the doctors showing that, um, but I think sometimes if you ask and then they give you a little bit, that's good. And if they don't, really trying to understand why not, and even asking them what what are the other hours that kids are getting, and yeah, that's a tricky one. So okay, for time's sake, I'm gonna keep us going, but I'm keeping an eye on the chat. But those are great questions. I think it is always a point of conversation when you want something and you're not seeing it on IEP, and I think it's important just to start and ask. Um, so that's a good segue, right, to procedural safeguards. And I think um, you have to know you always have the right to understand, to question, and to disagree, respectfully, right? The people on the other side of the table are usually doing the best they can. That's something I always have to remind myself of because even I get upset sometimes. I mean, I'm having a struggle this year with an IEP situation, and I just have to remind myself they're doing the best they can. I'm going to continue to be gracious, but I'm not going to give up. And so persistence is key, right? So if you are not getting something you want, I think being persistent, I mean, like the example that Taylor gave earlier, is we were persistent with that issue. We did not give up, right? And I think getting as much help and assistance as you can is really helpful. So first, if you have a disagreement or you're not understanding something, is reaching out to someone on that IEP team to get help. I would love to think it's your school psychologist. I don't know if all of you have school psychologists in your schools, um, because each state uses them differently and there is a shortage, but um, we are a great person to reach out to because we know a lot. We work at a lot of different buildings, and sometimes we can help you get a perspective of what's going on in this particular situation. If it's not a school psychologist, it could be someone else. It could be the administrator. Like in a situation where the team is not, hearing you, you can always kind of elevate it up and say, like, I'd really love to speak to the director of special education, or sometimes it might be the principal in the building. Um, but that is your right is to sit there and to ask questions, and you don't have to just accept what they are offering to you. You can even decline services. I giggle because I always think it's funny. We don't have a lot of parents that decline services, but sometimes we do. Most parents want more, right? But you also have that right to decline something that you're not comfortable with. So I actually wonder, Taylor, about the question earlier, like if there's a service that you feel like you don't want, sometimes it's usually all or nothing, I've heard them say, but I think that you also could say, I want this like taken off the IEP. And ideally, then that's a point of conversation at that table. Um, Briefly, I know, those who are attending may have kids on a variety of levels of disability, right? Sometimes I just wanted to make people aware that if your child doesn't qualify for an IEP, so maybe you're someone who has concerns about your child's development, but maybe they're not to the level that the team feels they require an individualized education program. There is another legislation, the American Disabilities Act, that provides something called a 504 plan. There's another acronym I could have thrown in there. And so this is a situation where a child might have a disability, often things like ADHD, diabetes, um, something that doesn't require the specialized instruction from like a teacher or a speech pathologist or a social worker, but they might require some accommodations to access their education. So this is a common one where kids who just need extra time on tests, just need like noise canceling headphones, just need, to sit near the front of the classroom. That is the type of plan that a child like that might get. And they are not going to be getting pull out services with direct instruction and academics. They're not going to get specialized programming, but they're going to get special accommodations in the classroom that would allow them to participate just like everyone else. So I think that is a related thing to know about if you are a parent of a child whose disability may be limiting, but not as significant as those that end up on IEPs. Okay, so I know we have a couple minutes left. I just wanted to end on talking about ways to advocate. So, um, something that even like Taylor and I talked about last year was starting each year with a communication to your child's teacher about your child's unique needs. I sometimes can be shy about this because I don't want to bother them. I don't, um, I want everybody to just kind of forget about the needs and just go on the year. And I'm assuming that the IEP is going to be read very carefully and all this stuff. But I've decided, nope, I'm going to send an email every year and I'm just going to outline my child's needs, and I'm going to start by telling them all about the good things about them. Because sometimes the IEP can be sort of focused on what's not going well. And so I want to remind them of what is amazing about my child, right? And that kind of sets their mindset too as an educator at the beginning of the year. Because IEPs happen at different times of the year, right? So like you may have a kid whose IEP is at the end of the year, like in March or something. And so this new school year comes up. Maybe if you have a new teacher or a new speech pathologist, social worker, fill in the blank, they may not know your child as well. And so that little email that you send them might be really helpful information um, for them, particularly when staff changes happen. I would also say reach out early to teachers if you have concerns about something, whether it's something you're seeing at home, if your child's verbal, something that your child's maybe telling you, um, or if it's communication that's coming home that's making you concerned. Don't wait on those things. Like ask for a meeting. You can ask for an IEP meeting at any time. And you can, I mean, you can ask, but then you can demand. Like, I want an IEP meeting because I feel like we need to talk about these things. Now, there's a lot of people that come to IEP meetings, so sometimes it can take a while for them to get all the people together. So sometimes the faster thing is to just talk with one team member, right? Maybe it's their special ed classroom teacher or a resource teacher, or if they have a speech pathologist, someone who is the case manager on that IEP, and just talk through those concerns over the phone, I would say would be my first step. And then if you still need an IEP, you can do that. Um, oh, as an aside, you can also do amendments to IEPs at any time. So if you need something small that needs to be changed, right? So even like Taylor's example of like asking about, well, what if you have a goal that you feel like is no longer useful because the child's not making progress and whatever. If the team wants to, they can make adjustments to goals and services. Usually big things require an IEP meeting, but smaller things, they can make changes in the middle of time. Um, when you go to your IEPs, I would say bring a list of the strengths and kind of 3 to 5 bullet points of what your child needs that in that next school year, because it is important that your voice is heard, and you don't want it to get lost in the shuffle. And I would say even if they should be formally asking you for your input before the IEP, but you can email um, that to them ahead of time, right? You can email that to them a month ahead of time and say, here's the areas that I want to see addressed on the IEP, and here's why, and here's the things that I'm observing at home, right? And they can use that and they can put that in their present level. Um, at the IEP, I would also just get really familiar with saying, can you tell me what that means? Can you? It's so uncomfortable. It's so uncomfortable as a parent to sit there and say, I think I should know this. I don't want to appear, stupid, or I don't want to, mess up their plan for how long this meeting is going to take, but ask that question. Ask it because you have a right to know what those things mean. And then this is my sampler email opener, which I end up having to use almost every year because something always happens, right? It's like, I just wanted to touch a base about my kids. I sent an email like 2 weeks ago where I said, to the resource teacher, I'm a little concerned about something that's happening, you know, this year. I want to just touch base. And she was great. And we set up a time to talk on the phone and we came up with some really great strategies that we think are going to work. And that didn't even require a full IEP meeting, but it did require that I reached out and let them know that this concern was happening, right? I'm seeing some comments over here. I just want to make sure. Oh, did you share your fun? Um, Taylor shared something which might be her little fun introduction to Jackson that she um oh good. Yeah, Amy's sharing some other thoughts that she learned about advocating is combining services of pushing into class and pulling out. Yeah, so making sure that you're asking where are services taking place? Are these services happening in the classroom? Are they pulling out? Can we make sure that whatever you're working on separately is actually helping that child in the classroom? Right? Because if they're working on something and they do it in the office with the speech pathologist, that's great. But if it's not helping them to communicate with their friends in their classroom and their peers or their teacher, then you're really not making progress, right? That's a great question to ask them. And that is, I think that's a nice idea is to say, can you and you can ask that to the team. That's not something that goes on the paperwork of like where it's happening, but you can say to the team, I would love to see that you work in the classroom with my kid and in an office setting, right? And maybe they do that naturally. Especially, I ask for that for social work stuff, right? Like if your child has behavioral needs or social emotional needs, where are those often showing up? In the classroom. So I love to see it when they can go into the classroom and work with our children, like in the setting that they're trying to get them to be successful. Um, Okay, I'm gonna look at these in a second. Asking, ooh, life skills. Yes. They didn't have life skills goals. Yeah, that's a good one. Goals don't have to be only academic. That's so interesting. Um, but
Just
yeah,
to jump in, they didn't say, or they told us that people don't usually advocate for that till high school. So they were shocked when I asked in fifth grade.
so interesting. I have a friend who teaches third grade, and she said she, as a gen ed third grade teacher, decided this year not to give homework, but to give like life skills homework, even just to all her whole class, right? Not necessarily all the kids on IEPs, but um, but yeah, those life skills are so important. How to, follow directions, how to get a task done, and making sure they can do those in a classroom setting and monitoring that. Because if you aren't monitoring that as a fifth grader, it's going to be that much harder to start it at ninth grade, right? So yeah, that's really helpful feedback. Um, okay, and then Jenny had something to share about. You have one of those fun tests, those fun laws in Indiana about not passing a test. Yeah, so there are some states that have passed these crazy tests or crazy laws where if a student doesn't pass their state standardized test at a certain grade level, that they could potentially be retained. Um, just so you all know, it really should never affect a child on an IEP. Um, I'm going to say that that would be extremely discriminatory. And most all states that I'm aware of have workarounds for kids on IEPs. Um, Even most in Michigan, most of our kids were not retained because we had like ways of showing portfolio growth and other fun things. But yeah, sometimes legislation can be great. And that is a case example, Jenny, of yeah, a dangerous law that really could harm kids and retain them because they haven't acquired the learning that they need to learn. So I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm glad that you didn't have to go through that. Um, okay, we have only a few minutes left and we have to have time for questions and a fun giveaway I hear is coming up too. So, a couple of things we've already talked about here, but what to do when? Um, if anybody has a question about what to do when, we can put that in at the very end. But I think almost all of these start with what to do when is just talking with someone at the team, at the school, right? And having a conversation with them. And then if you don't get help there, bringing in someone else. So like Jenny had an example where she said they have a advocate program. So it sounds like she was able to get somebody on her team to help educate her. There's often outside groups, right, that can be a resource. In Michigan, we have like Michigan Alliance for Families that has some resources, different things like that. So first start with the team at the school, and then if you don't get help there, there are um, other resources outside of that. And just know that you, again, are your kid's best advocate. You know them best, and if you're feeling uncomfortable about something on the IEP or some decision that was made, it's okay to bring that up and to say that. So the key takeaways, you can always request an evaluation or an IEP meeting or just an informal meeting. And you have the right to understand and participate in your child's education. And that collaboration is key. That's going to help the team and it's going to help you. And I would also say document everything and keep records of things, right? And that just remember that you're your child's best advocate. Okay, that is my conclusion. And I do have time for questions, but I know we have a KARES giveaway, so I wanted to put this in so we didn't forget.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I put everyone's names who were here, but you do need to be present to win. So hopefully you're still on the call. I'm just gonna randomly draw. Katie Watkins, are you here? You can either chime in on the chat or turn off your mic or turn on your mic, I mean. Katie Watkins, are
I
you
see her
here?
name still there. Exciting.
Katie, give you a second in the chat. Are we there? All right, well, maybe not here. So I will try the next. Janet Puth. Janet Puth, are you here? Nope. Okay. We'll try again. Brendan Garcia. Brendan Garcia. Anybody just chime into the chat or raise your hand, or you don't have to be on camera or anything, but we just need to know you're actually here. All right. Stephanie Brown. Oh, Brendan Garcia got on there. Sorry.
There we go.
Okay, Brendan Garcia,
Ding, ding.
you're on. All right, I will message you and we'll make sure you get your gift card. Thank you. All right, carry on.
Awesome. So yeah, so now I have just time if there's other questions. I noticed Kelly put in a comment about that's really helpful about the passing the reading tests in some of those states to make sure you know what your options are if your child doesn't pass the test early on. And that's something you can ask the teachers about.
Taylor, didn't we have some questions from the Facebook group or the on one of the posts on the CARES page?
Let me go see.
See in the chat, we have a nearby neighbor to us, Taylor. Jen
I
from
know, I
Birmingham.
saw that.
So one of the questions that I had asked on our Facebook group was like, you know, with everything that's going on right now at the federal level in the US with the cuts to the Department of Education and OSEP and you know, I think families are just concerned and kind of like, how does this all affect me? And, you know, what is my child going to still have these protections? Or what is the
Mhm.
process like if I have to escalate a complaint? So, do you have any just like insight or hopefully some comforting words on that for the community? Or
Yeah, that I mean, I think that's so fair. It's, a lot of the rhetoric today can make us very fearful for our children, right, and their futures. And I think the one thing to say is that as long as your educational team is there, they're going to be fighting for your child, right? I mean, that's why all of us go into working in public education. You'll find a bad apple here or there, just like everything. But so, who knows what funding will look like and things like that. But right now, we haven't seen changes to the state level funding, and a lot of some of those places, this decisions are still in the state's hands. But it certainly can be scary when we think about, will this legislation always be there to protect my child? And I'll be the first one picketing. No. Um, but yeah, I think that when we have these kind of moments of fear, we have to kind of look at what's happening for our child in their current places. And in our setting, we haven't seen, changes to staffing or things like that yet. So I think that for now, I personally am not super concerned about like IEPs going away or things like that, but always paying attention, right? And knowing I'm going to step in and advocate if I absolutely need to, right? And that it would be crazy if they overruled IDEA, and that's ultimately the protection that we all have to fall back on. And I don't see that going away anytime. Um, really, I don't think anybody has the ability to. So, yeah, but that's a good question, Melissa.
there's another question in the chat that I think is super appropriate for our Acadian 5C kiddos because a lot of them use communication devices. So Jessica's asking how old were kids when they got their devices in school, if any families want to chat or chime in with that information, and can that be included in the IEP if needed?
Mm.
And in my experience, the answer is yes.
Yes.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, that should be on their IEP if they are nonverbal but need that kind of device to communicate with. And that can start very young. My first job out of grad school was working in birth to three, where I did all home visits. And a large part of my job was working with the speech pathologists to basically train parents on how to use those AAC devices because they're so life-changing for some of those kids that need those. Do I remember exactly where it goes on the IEP? No, but yeah, it should be on their IEP, and that's something to ask about. Ask early. Don't be shy because there is a process, and I will say it's not automatic. But if a parent's asking for it, they're more likely to start that process of getting a device and starting to work with them and teach them on that. Yeah, Jen says assistive technology is where that can fit into. Yeah.
I'll chime in and say that my son started using an AAC device when he was like 3.5, and we did have it put into his IEP eventually that it has to be accessible to him, like fully charged and accessible at all times when he's at
Oh,
school. I don't remember which part of the IEP it's in, but it's something also where like he wears glasses and it's part of that part. Like he
mm.
has glasses, he has an AAC, these always have to be with him.
I think it's in accommodations.
Yeah, yes.
You're right. It
That
is
sounds
even,
right.
it's on that, oh, I don't have a sample of it. Yeah, it is. There's actually a language section where it kind of talks about that if they need some kind of device like that. But that's a really good question, Jessica.
In the Facebook, it says who is required to like follow, well, I guess read and follow your child's IEP, like because there's so many people outside of like the teacher, the special ed teacher, OTPT speech that interact
Yes.
with we have special teachers like gym, art, music. We have
Yeah.
the cafeteria, the lady who works in the cafeteria. Like what are the parameters and how, like, yeah, who has to?
Oh, that's such a good question. Everyone has to, but so there's what's supposed to happen and there's what does happen. And we all know there's a gap often. And that's where we come in as parents. And if we notice a gap, we say something and ask for the gap to be closed, right? Um, so in the school district that I worked for, we had something called like, we had the full IEP, but that everybody was supposed to have access to. But then we also had like a quick, I don't know what we called it, a quick sheet. They had a cheat sheet for teachers so that they gave those to everybody. And it was just a little bit of a faster way of saying like a brief snapshot of what are the goal areas and then what are like the accommodations that the teachers need to be aware of. Um, you could also kind of make sure that teachers know about that. Like I did have to, I won't say what year, but